welcome to another edition of the Creighton Report. The Creighton Report Extended, a report by Hunter Davis, who was sent by the Sunday Times to make a report, a comprehensive report of a comprehensive system. He spent a year in the life from 1974 to 75, and the book was released in 1976. We're up to the chapter where it talks about how Creighton School became a comprehensive. So the definition of a comprehensive system is it allows children of all abilities to attend. In the old days, as I said before many times, but I'll go into more detail, you used to have grammar schools and secondary moderns. Now, you used to pass something called 11 plus, if you pass that, you go to a grammar school. Basically, it's an academic school, you just do all academic subjects. Then you've got the secondary modern, and you would do other subjects, academic subjects as well, but you would do woodwork. I talked about that last time, and metalwork and things like that. What happened is that's how it was in the 50s and early 60s. But what they were finding, secondary moderns never even used to do O-levels. They used to do something called CSE, which I will talk about the difference another time. But basically, you never even had any opportunities in secondary moderns. But things were changing, and over the years, when they started introducing O-levels into secondary modern schools, you were finding that more and more pupils were passing and doing really well, in their coming out from secondary moderns, and people from grammar schools weren't doing so well when they were actually put into their respective schools, depending on whether they passed their 11 plus or not. That was considered unfair. Also, you had upper class families that were wealthy, and they were pushing their kids, and getting into grammar schools just purely, because they were wealthy. So the author of this book, Hunter Davis, actually went to a secondary modern school. Now, he became the journalist for the Sunday Times. That has got to be considered a success. He is a success coming from a secondary modern. He says he can't spell properly, but you have to respect that. So a lot of people were coming out of grammar schools that were divided at 11 years old, for instance. They were coming out as failures, and some people going to secondary moderns were coming out successful. Old leaders, you know what I'm saying, MPs and everything that, that are in the House of Commons. They all came from a grammar school system. And they're the ones, the ones that went to grammar school. I can understand that they want to actually continue that today. But yes, comprehensives were not a new thing. Comprehensive schools were around in the 50s. But they are completely different to the comprehensive school at this particular time, and we will look at that in great detail. So wealthy families, obviously they wanted to put their children through grammar school, so they were always worried about their sons or daughters' performance in the 11 plus. They failed the 11 plus, and it was like, you failed at 11. This particular system was considered totally unfair. The Butler Act came out later, actually saying that from now on, children are going to be divided on merit. As I said, wealthy families would put their children through grammar, and sort of bend the system, if you know what I'm saying. But things were changing, and obviously the 11 plus system being unfair, I mean, some children and families were actually suicidal if they actually failed that test. So in 1965, that's where it all began. They wanted to get rid of selection, basically. They said that, the selection basis at 11 plus was not only not nice, but not fair. So basically, Haringey decided in 1965, 66 that they were going to introduce a comprehensive system, And the two schools, which was Tollington and William Grimshaw being the secondary modern, Tollington being the grammar school, they would now integrate and become a comprehensive system. So at the time of the book, which Hunter Davies started evaluating a comprehensive system in 1974, Haringey already had 7 years to find its comprehensive feat. So I mentioned quite a few subjects that grammar schools didn't do last time. One of the subjects I forgot to mention was cookery, domestic science. I'm glad actually that our school called it domestic science, because I had a couple of cousins that used to go to a grammar school, and if they saw my timetable and they saw cookery on it, they would have started laughing at me. So what's this? But you know, if they did actually see my timetable and said, Andy, what's domestic science? Oh, pretty intense stuff, that, you know, the sciences, pretty, formulas and complicated things and substances and this and that. Oh, really? No, it's just cookery. I remember we were in the cookery class, and I remember we used to work in groups. I think it was like this. I'm pretty sure I worked with a person called Pericles Tiss, the short little Greek kid I mentioned before. And we were looking, the teacher was out of the class for a second, and you have this little manual of how to make fairy cakes, and it said a teaspoonful of yeast. And he would say to me, what's a teaspoon? We didn't know. I mean, it sounds obvious now, the difference between a teaspoon and a tablespoon. But anyway, he goes, well, what the hell's a teaspoon? He says, I don't know. There was no measuring, there was nothing to measure with. So I just said, just put that in. And anyway, it was really nice, the cookery, the cookers that we used to have. You used to be able to see right through them. So you've got a whole load of fairy cakes cooking, and you have a whole load of ovens. And I remember that the teacher would go into some other kind of theory while everything was cooking in all the ovens. And so we're looking across, and everyone's fairy cake, they sort of rose just a little bit, but nothing that you could notice. And we had a look at our fairy cakes, they were growing and growing, the size of cricket balls, and they kept on growing. And it was everyone in the class was all looking. I said, oh look, I like the size of your fairy cakes, and can we have a piece of that? Oh no. Anyway, when it had finished, our fairy cakes came out as flat as a pancake, was like that, and everyone else's fairy cakes came out lovely. I said, can we have a piece of yours? No. So, there was another thing in cookery. You have a list of all the things that you're going to cook through the year, and once was a Welsh rabbit. And I said, I think I should phone the RSPCA here. I don't want to start cooking rabbit. Someone comes up to me, and no, Andy, it's not rabbit, it's rarebit. It's Welsh rarebit, which is basically just cheese on toast. And it was so done, like me, for instance, you put cheese on toast, it's just plonk a piece of cheese, put it on, it's nothing to have a lesson over, but it was all done really nicely, and it was very special peppers and this and that and all the right ingredients and everything, and then you just have your cheese on toast. But that was domestic science, but let's just say what it really is called. It's called cookery, let's face it. So there was another subject that I think I failed to mention that they don't do in grammar schools, and that's art, visual studies. We used to have a teacher called Mr. Reed in the first year, and Mr. Reed used to, it was all, they made it an open office. He had his office, but there was no walls there, if you can see. He was private in there, but he always used to listen to what everyone used to say. And I was just complaining to another person. I was saying, what happened to that project that we were going to do? And I was complaining this and that and that and this. Mr. Reed wasn't going to let that, he wasn't going to take that lying down. So he comes out and he says, Andres, and he gave me some philosophical reason why we didn't do that project. Now, I'll tell you what the project was. One day he said to us, For instance, we are going to make a commercial. You know, you would pick a product and you would design a commercial. We are going to film it and we're going to present it. Now we're talking 1972/73 here. You know, the only format that was out at that time was something called Super 8. Super 8 was celluloid. You used to buy a roll of film, really expensive. I mean, it was only a few quid, but you know, if you translate it to 21st century prices, a 3-minute film would have cost about 15 quid. So you would have to have the equipment to film it, you plan it, film it in your group, you would do it, you would have to have special editing facilities to edit it, and you would need an 8mm projector, which I would believe that 8mm projectors, they used to have 15mm projectors in our school. It was not only impractical, it was not economically viable, and it was too intensive. Absolutely, you know, I mean, even as a 12-year-old, I mean, I was excited. I was excited about that project. But even as a 12-year-old, I knew all those things. I mean, I was complaining, but I knew all those things. Anyway, Mr. Reed comes out with some, you know, philosophical argument why we didn't do it. Now, I sort of think that the kids today, how lucky they are. All you need is a phone. You know, I mean, some phones actually record in 4K now. You know, you could actually, you know, design, you know, if you've got a 1.5 hour art lesson, you could design it in 20 minutes, film it, you know, edit it if one person's got a laptop, and you could present it by the end of the lesson. I mean, kids today they don't know how lucky they are. So in Creighton School we used to have fire drills. Fire drills used to go off spontaneously, you know, and you would all have to vacate the school basically and come up into your lines, into your form classes, and the your form tutor would write down, make sure everyone's there and everything. Used to happen every so often. Anyway, in June 1973 it happened. We didn't think nothing of it. Then we found out that it was more serious than that. Apparently, there was a school in Camden Town, I think it was a girls' school, that actually the roof actually collapsed. So thank God there was no, it happened I think in the night time, so thank God there was no children hurt or anything. So can you imagine this? You know, I would imagine this is how it happened. I don't know this for sure, but Mr. Loads gets a phone call, and there's a phone call and it says, evacuate the south wing immediately. They said, what's up? He goes, the same structure that was, the same designers and everything that was from the Camden Town School, is the same design as the Creighton South Wing. Now you've got to remember that the roof, you used to have all the science lab holding on to that. So if that collapsed, you would have had the whole building collapsing in on itself. So Mr. Loads, I would imagine, as cool as a cucumber, says, right, tells his secretary, run the fire drill. What's going on in the hall? They're doing O-level geography, sir. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if you're doing an O-level? You're doing an O-level in a hall, and they, you know, they weren't going to take the chance on kids' lives, for instance. There was, you know, Mr. Loads was just saying, well, they're going to have to take their desks, their chairs, all the papers and everything, carrying it all the way to the south wing, which was a good 500 yards away, you know, to actually continue their O-level geography, you know, in the north wing. That must have been a real nightmare. Anyway, we make the ITN news. You know, I remember we made the 6 o'clock news, we made the 10 o'clock news on ITN. And I'm sitting there watching it, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I've looked on the internet and everything, but this was, as I said, 1973. You're not likely to find it. If someone did find it, please let me know. But Mr. Loads is actually interviewed on television. As I said, cool as a cucumber. The interviewer says to him, "What did you do with all the pupils?" And Mr. Loads says, "Well, we've got a big playing field. We had them all sitting down on there. It was a lovely sunny day. We thought it was a picnic." You know, the South Wing is half of Creighton School. 2 schools merged together, it's half of Creighton School. An absolute nightmare for the teachers. You couldn't even go anywhere near the school. So the school is now chopped in half. It's June, and I do remember this because I told my uncle, that I had a 10-week summer holiday. So obviously the summer holiday, they just announced the summer holiday. Everyone has their summer holiday from mid-June. You know, usually schools go to the end of July and then you have your holiday. So I said to my uncle, I said, we've got a 10-week holiday. And he says to me, don't you think that's a bit too long? And I'm a little kid now. I said, it's never enough a holiday. Anyway, 10 weeks goes by. I mean, I've even forgotten the name of Creighton School by this time. You know, 10 weeks is actually, you know, my uncle's right, you know, 10 weeks is actually a really long holiday. Anyway, we go back. I'm getting ready. I'm remembering my first day and what the second years said on my first day when I came to school. And I'm really nervous. I've still got my school uniform on. I don't know exactly when they actually plan to abolish it. I've got a feeling that we voted in 1973 and it officially got abolished at the end of 1974. Don't quote me on that. I just think that's the case. So I think we had to wear school uniform for another year. That's the way I remember it. Anyway, I'm walking towards the school. I remember going down Rootwood Avenue. I'm really nervous, really nervous now. For the second year of my Creighton school, this is September 1973. I'm walking up Creighton Avenue. I see Miss Cross. You know, she's a bit ahead of me, but she just turns into Creighton School and she's smiling at me like this. You know, and I'm wondering, there's not many people about here. What's going on? Anyway, I go up, I'm at the entrance of the north wing of the school, I'm walking up, I don't see a single pupil. I walk through the entrance and this teacher comes out. I mean, we had him, he was quite a plump guy, very nice teacher. I used to have him for English. I do not know his name. But anyway, he comes out and says, what are you doing here? I said, first day of school, sir. First day of school? And he takes me into the office. There's an office there, just to the right as you get in, and he takes me right in. Didn't you get this memo? He goes, what, sir? He gives it to me. He goes, we are changing the date of you coming to school. You will now, instead of Tuesday, September, you will come in on Thursday and you will start coming in half days. So in other words, the system was that you would come in, for instance, this is all pupils, so they must have had this on alternative days. So for instance, this is Thursday, you come half a day. When it's 1 o'clock, you would go home. There's no afternoon classes. But the next day, you would come in the afternoon from 2 o'clock and do your afternoon classes. So your timetable was sort of 1 day, half day. The next day, the afternoon. The next day, the morning. The next day, afternoon. Sort of that kind of method. Anyway, he says to me, lucky boy, you've got another 2 days off. And I'm thinking, all that nervousness, all that walking, you know, all for nothing. I was just coming to the school, you know. I didn't really even make a fool of myself because there was no one there to make a fool of myself with, if you know what I'm saying. Anyway, I thought this was quite funny actually. You know when you always have on the first day you come in, whether you're a first, second or third year or whatever, you would come in and you would always have a free day. You would have a free day completely. It was funny, we went in on the Thursday, can't remember anything about it, I wasn't nervous at all, I'd already gone through my nervousness. And what happened was you had the free day up to the lunchtime, and then when I came in on Friday, we came in the afternoon and still had a free day. That was something that I thought was really funny, but that's the way it was. And there's some conjecture, some people think that this half-day system lasted for 2 years. I can tell you this half-day system did not last for 2 years. It definitely lasted up until Christmas. Some people say 6 months. 6 months seems believable to me. I don't remember when it ended, but it probably ended about February. Now with the roof, what they had to do, they realised that they had to not only extend the beams, they were too short, they had to replace them. And then they found asbestos in the roof. So that had to be all sorted out and everything, and this took so much time. But it definitely wasn't 2 years. I would say a realistic time was 6 months, but I can't remember exactly when it ended. But I know it didn't last the whole of my second year. So we're now second year pupils. And from now on, you know, because I used to live near the south wing, you know, I was a stone throw away from the south wing, and from now on, second, third, fourth, fifth, it was all registration in the north wing. I was well peeved. But anyway, we were 142. Our class was 142 in the first year, and suddenly now we are 213 with, I had to ask, her photograph is actually in the Creighton school report. I know it's this teacher sitting on the far right and she's sitting down. I had to ask the Creighton Forum actually what her name was. Apparently her name is Margaret Ripman. Now, we had Margaret Ripman for history in the first year. We had her as our form tutor in room 13 for the second and the third year, and still that name doesn't ring a bell. You know, that is the lasting legacy of Miss Ripman. Anyway, we used to have history. We used to have history in the first year. It was a lovely old lady. There was an old lady that used to do history with us. She was lovely. I used to sit next to David Singleton, and you know, I used to get quite good grades from her. And then suddenly, in the middle of that year, she must have left, and then Miss Ripman came along and carried on the history lesson for the first year. Anyway, she comes over to me, and I hand in a piece of work, and she looks at it, blah 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 blah. Ah, B plus. And she gives it to me, and she's sort of standing back and said, you know, Andreas should be happy with his B plus. And I'm looking at it, and she's looking at me, realizing that I'm not happy. And she can't understand what's going on. And then she suddenly grabs my folder and everything. Oh, what's going on here? And she suddenly reverses and goes back to all the marks that the other teacher gave me. And she used to give me A minus, A minus, and A minus, and suddenly I've got a B plus. And she's looking at me, and she says to me, it's all subjective, Andreas. It's all subjective. And if I was back there, I wouldn't have said this, but you know, I would love to be back there and say, can't you subjectively give me back my old grade? If it's B plus and an A minus is virtually the same thing, can't you carry on giving me an A minus? No, it was always B plus from that point. Anyway, we're in history. I used to sit next to David Singleton, and we're doing capitals of the world, and she says to us, the capital of Holland is The Hague. So I go home, I look it up in my encyclopedia. I don't know why I did this, but it said the capital of Holland was Amsterdam. So I mentioned this the next day. She got such the hump. She said, Andreas, it's The Hague. Yes, but the encyclopedia said it's The Hague. So I go, I'm sort of looking, I mean, I'm not, you know, I can understand, you know, that she thought that I was challenging her authority. It's in the handbook. It's in every single handbook, whether it's business, whether it's teachers. Teachers will never say it's in the handbook. He said, never let someone in your class tell you that you're wrong, you know, even if you are. You know, it's in the business. It's even in the business handbook. No one will tell you it's there. But basically they're saying, never let someone on the shop floor, you know, tell you how to run your business, even if you're going to make £1 million. Because if you start agreeing with them and start talking about it with them, before you know it, they've taken over your company. She thought I was going to take over her lesson. So she was she didn't like me at all. You know, but I can understand, you know, looking at it objectively, I can understand that she felt I was challenging her authority, you know, and obviously, you know, yeah, the capital of Holland in some encyclopedias is Amsterdam or The Hague. And I remember Singleton sort of gave me a look after this, and I said, what do you think, Singleton? My encyclopedia said that the capital of Holland, you know, is Amsterdam. And you know what Singleton turned around and said to me? Andreas, encyclopedias have been known to be wrong. And I said to myself, Singleton, you're going to go far in life. You know, where are you learning? Where are you getting all your information from if you start challenging, you know, the books? But I thought it was quite funny that Singleton would say, well, yeah, encyclopedias, no. But, you know, I wanted to say, if I was back there, I said, yeah, okay, encyclopedias have been known to be wrong. But has ever David Singleton been ever wrong? So I can understand a teacher being tough. You had to be tough in Creighton. I can understand that. But you know, even Mr. MacDonald, you know, he was a tough head of year. For instance, even Mr. MacDonald had a mellow side, and even Miss Stevens, who had a reputation of being really tough and strict, you know, she must have had a mellow side as well. Unfortunately, Miss Ripman did not have a mellow side at all. It just kept on getting worse and worse. And then one day in the third year, she decided to allocate everybody and said, this is your new positions that you're going to sit. Now, we only had Miss Ripman for 10 minutes in the second and third year, you know, for registration. And it was like, I mean, she put me right in the front. It was like solitary confinement for 6 months. I only had a couple of girls behind me, and all my friends were at the back. You know, I just couldn't understand why she had done that. But I always look for reasons. I said, will we really? I mean, this is my perspective of how I felt our class was. Maybe our class was unruly. You know, maybe, you know, we had annoyed her so much that she decided to change all the positions and everything. But I was really, really peeved. Anyway, in the registration class, you know, we were 213, and in the third year we were 313. 3 meant you're in the third year, 13 means you're in class number 13 of the North Wing. Anyway, what you would do is you would go to registration. All she would do is call out your name. She would tick off your name, for instance, 10 minutes, you know, 10 to 9 to 9 o'clock, then you're off to your class. Anyway, the bell rings and we just get up. 2 seconds later, we're just towards the door. 2 seconds later, she said, "Stop what you're doing. Everybody, someone's just thrown a chalk and it's hit me right in the eye. Sit down, every single one of you. Which one of you threw that chalk at me? I want to know now, which one of you threw that chalk at me? It's hit me right in the eye. I could have lost my eye." Which I do understand, you know, that was pretty dangerous. I couldn't understand, you know, someone had thrown a chalk at the teacher. Anyway, we're sitting down there and she says, "Okay, you don't want to talk, eh? Detention, half an hour every single night until someone owns up." And we're sort of thinking, we're all looking at each other, oh my God, you know, who's done this now and caused us all this aggravation? Anyway, we go. We have to come. Now remember, I told you that my house was a stone's throw away from the south wing. So you used to finish from the south wing. Instead of going home, I had to go to the north wing for detention every single night. Anyway, you used to walk into the room and we used to ask the teacher, but Miss Rittman actually said, if anyone's embarrassed to actually admit this to the class, you can come and see me privately. She was in the room 13 for most of the day. You know, if you wanted to own up, you could own up there. Anyway, we used to come in every single day and one of us would ask, "Did anyone own up? Did anyone own up, miss?" "No." And we had to sit there, half an hour detention, really quiet, did absolutely nothing. Half an hour would go by, go home. Next night, it would be the same routine. Someone would ask, "Did anyone own up, miss?" "No." And we would sit down, and this lasted for 2.5 weeks. Anyway, I used to make jokes. We're in detention. I used to make jokes. Remember, I'm at the front of the class. You know, I can't really say anything, but I wrote down on a piece of paper. It was passed around the class, and everyone was laughing. And the teacher said, "What's that, Andres?" She reads it. "Oh, ha ha, very funny." I wrote down, "Why don't you check the chalk for fingerprints?" If I was back there, I would have said to Ms. Rittman, I said, "If you don't laugh at my jokes, who will?" But anyway, it went on and on and on. I know people were peeved. I remember Jeffrey Edgar was coming up to me and saying, you know, I said, you know, it was causing him a lot of problem because he had a lot of after-class activities, and he was saying, you know, this is putting me out. And I sort of looked at him and I said, "How do I know it wasn't you that threw the chalk, Jeff?" He looks at me as if to say he didn't find it funny at all. Anyway, I went up to Roger Meggs. He was sitting at the back of the class, and I said to Roger Meggs, "Why don't you just admit it? You know, you're the only one. Every time there's a chance for trouble, you know, you are Mr. Troublemaker. You were the only person who could have thrown it from the back of the room." And he said to me, "I didn't do it." I said, "Meggs, do us all a favour. Save us a load of aggro." "I didn't do it." Anyway, it carries on and on and on and on. 2.5 weeks. Miss Rittman, unfortunately, was beaten. And she says to us, "Okay, you can go." And that was over. Anyway, that was 50 years ago. We can now reveal who threw that chalk with modern 21st century detective work. And I want you to actually concur with me to actually find out who was responsible here. Now this was the name of everybody in the class. Okay, so these are all the names. But in reality, only 6 people could have thrown that chalk. What you've got to look for, when I go through all the clues and everything, what you've got to look for is motive and opportunity. This is a picture, this is a couple of pictures. Now, this is not a stock photograph of a class. This is the actual class where the chalk was being thrown. Okay, so it was a few years later, but basically the class hasn't changed. All the desks were in exactly the same position and everything. So these are the main suspects. Remember, okay, I want you to work with me here. Remember, when you have removed all the impossible, anything that remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So as I said, there was the whole class was under suspicion, but really there could only be, half a dozen suspects. The first one was Pericles Tiss. Now he was at the back of the class, but he was short. I mean, Jeffrey Egger used to call him short ass. Now throwing a chalk from the back of the class, I mean, he was good at cricket and everything, he was good at bowling, but he's so short and everything, how's he going to get it up and over everybody? He would have to do a sort of rounder sort of hit. What was his motive? I remember him asking the teacher once if he could go home just 5 minutes early because he lived near the class and everything, because he had football practice in the night time and he had forgotten part of his kit. So to save time, asked the teacher, can I go 5 minutes early? She says no. So there's a motive there. Has he got the opportunity? No, I'm not really sure. Then we have another person from this position in the class. That's a person that I haven't mentioned before, a really, really nice guy, Aldi Hammond. What was his gripe? Well, there was a series called Planet of the Apes. This was the time when the original ape films were really at their heyday. And a series was coming on the television, and he brought in a magazine explaining, it was a really nice magazine, with pictures and everything of the new TV series that they were producing and everything. And the teacher confiscated it and said, look, come after school, after everything, I'll give it back to you. Aldi Hammond goes back to her and asks for the magazine back, and it's mysteriously disappeared. No one knows what's happened to it. So Aldi Hammond did have a little bit of a gripe there, a little bit of a grudge. Was it him? Did he have the opportunity? I don't know. Then we have Jeffrey Edgar. Could he have done it? What was his motive? What was his grudge against his teacher? Well, one free period at one time, he taught her to play 52 card pickup. Now, I don't know if you know this game, but I'll have to explain it to you, how you would play 52 card pickup. It's very important that you take the jokers out of the pack. That's the first thing to say. The only joker here is Jeffrey Edgar. So he suddenly goes, pick them all up. Miss Rittman didn't pick them all up. I said, you wanted to play 52 card pickup. That's it. You've got to pick them all up. So, was that enough of a motive for Jeffrey Edgar? Certainly in the right position in the class to throw the chalk. So basically, all she had to do was this, and then she would have completed her game of 52 card pickup. Then we had me. I told you my gripe. I told you my grudge. I was an A- student, and suddenly this teacher comes along and gives me a B+, totally downgraded. And also because I challenged her authority and everything, she wouldn't give me, she came up on top of me like a ton of bricks, when I said to her that the capital of of Holland is Amsterdam, and she said, it's The Hague. She didn't like me at all. But you have to understand that where I was sitting, I'm right in the front of the class. If I had thrown the chalk at her from that distance, two things, I would have probably taken her eye out, because I'm so close. Another thing is, everyone's getting up and walking to the door. They would have seen me. Do you think that my classmates would have spent 2.5 weeks detention just to protect me? They would have just said it was Andreas, and I would have done the same thing if it was someone else. So did I have the opportunity? Well, I think not. We also have another suspect. Well, there was Kay Philippou. Kay Philippou was just sitting behind me. But again, I don't think she had any grudge against the teacher. And also, she's also too close. As I said, she's just sitting right behind me. If she had thrown it, people would have seen. And another suspect that we had that was sitting in the back of the class, was David Singleton. Yeah, you remember I told you he would, if you can imagine Magnus Pike, you know, as a 12, 13-year-old with long hair, you've got David Singleton. He's at the back of the class. He had the opportunity, but really did he do it? His motive was, for instance, that he was so clever. He was so clever in Miss Rittman's history class. You know, he would get the work and he would see so far ahead. He would ask Miss Rittman, for instance, can I have extra work? And then eventually Miss Rittman actually got fed up and said to him, look, you're going to have to wait a little bit. I've got nothing prepared. And Singleton sort of sitting there, you know, sort of nothing to do. Is that enough of a motive? Who knows? There's also another possibility. From outside the window, from the grassy knoll, you know, the window was actually open, so someone could have thrown the chalk through the window, and yeah, but you see, like just like the magic bullet, you would, you know, it would be a magic chalk. You know, it would have to go through the window, then actually change direction and go towards Miss Rittman. So whether you believe that theory, I don't know. But yes, after 50 years, we will now reveal WhoDunnit.
Will the real Whodunit stand up, please?
Yes, it was me. Let me explain. So let me take you back to the scene of the crime. All I did was I flipped a piece of paper. All I did as I was walking out of the class, I just screwed up a piece of paper onto my finger like this, and all I did was like that. But the teacher kept on saying to me, well, to everybody, chalk. Who threw the chalk? Who threw the chalk at me? And I'm sort of thinking, because I'm just so stupid, you know, I couldn't correlate that my little piece of paper was the actual chalk. The clue actually was, if you notice, that I said we should have checked the chalk for fingerprints. That piece of chalk was never found. She never looked on the floor and said, right, there's the piece of chalk. There was no chalk. No chalk was found at all. So, yeah. Is it my superior intellect that beat Miss Rittman? No. It was my superior stupidity that beat the teacher. And in that kind of scenario, she had absolutely no chance. If I was back there and I was clever enough to correlate that it was me, I would have had a real dilemma. I would have had a real dilemma, which I never had at that time because I was too stupid. I would have sort of thought, what do I do? Do I actually admit to the teacher, go up to her and say, look, it wasn't a chalk, it was an accident, I flicked a little piece of paper, you know, and it's hit you in the eye, it was never likely to take out your eye. You know, I don't know what I would have done. It would have been a real dilemma because, as I said to you, Miss Rittman didn't like me one little bit. She would have had to punish me in some way. You know, I'm sure it would have been something stupid like, here's 1,000 lines, Andres. The lines would be, don't flip pieces of paper randomly into the air to hit teachers in the eye. You know, I didn't fancy, you know, writing out, you know, 1,000 times, you know, that particular sentence. So I have to make an apology to all my classmates. It was me that actually made you have detention for 2.5 weeks. But, you know, the only thing I can say to that is, you know, whenever you're playing 52 card pickup, always remember that there's always a joker in the pack.